Happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is EdTech Situation Room episode 128 on March 27th, 2019. The EdTech Situation Room is a podcast where I discuss interesting news as it relates to technology and educational technology, along with my good friend, Dr. Wes Fryer. Good evening, Wes. How are you this evening?
Good evening, Jason. I am thrilled to be here after a 3-week hiatus. This may be our longest break in podcasting, so apologies to our cast of, dozens of fans, if not hundreds, who knows? I actually have no idea, because whatever little program I used to use to look at the S3 statistics, I don't use that anymore. And I don't think I pay for it. So anyway, it's good to be back, and I'm sure that we will not even scratch the surface of the articles tonight, but it's good to be back.
Agreed. And for those of you joining us for the first time, again, the EdTech Situation Room is a podcast where Wes and I talk about technology news, usually from the lens of a classroom. If you are interested in taking a look at the source articles from our news every week, you can go to our website, edtechsr.com, where you will find show notes each week. And then later on, we'll talk a little bit about how you could stumble back into this podcast in case you are a first-time viewer. Now, as Wes said, we've been gone for a couple of weeks as we've both been in and out of town. There's some spring break action somewhere in there, and so there's a lot of news to talk about. But I thought we'd start with two kind of big topics that are breaking news this week, because I think they are, kind of things that will impact the classroom. So starting off with the European Union, which is probably best known as the area of the world that seems to be guiding internet policy right now as it relates to privacy, security, and many other factors. The EU has passed a new set of copyright directives, and according to Forbes yesterday, basically it's going to be a lot more interesting on the internet to publish and not violate copyright. Now, there's a lot of very nuanced ways of looking at these new EU directives, but the big one is that they are going to start holding platforms responsible for copyright infringement. So to give you a clear piece of how this works, because of safe harbor regulations and other legal manifestations that the United States has pushed into internet regulation over the past 25 years, a person that hosts a platform, so think of it in terms of YouTube. YouTube is a platform that you publish your information onto. To this point, the person that's been responsible for violation of copyright has been the individual uploading the information. And what the new EU directives, copyright directives, say is that the platform will be as responsible than the individuals that are violating copyright in making sure that copyrighted materials are not published on a platform without permission. Now, as you might imagine, if you know anything about kind of the ins and outs of copyright law for the last 25 years as it's modified the digital age, this is a huge shift in the way we do things. And one of the reasons why something like a YouTube, but really tons of platforms have relied on the fact that the individuals that are violating the copyright to start with have been ultimately responsible for copyright violations. And now that those platforms will be responsible, the argument could be from critics of these types of decisions is that content creators will be held less liable for that, and instead platforms will need to answer to those copyright regulations, which could mean that the easy published platforms that we are used to as users in 2019 could ultimately be very negatively impacted. So, Wes, I know this is something you care very much about, in part because you yourself are a creator that utilizes a number of different platforms to publish your wares. What do you think this means to you?
Well, I'm afraid it's going to mean a more fractured global internet, because, even with the GDPR, the general directive on privacy regulation, I think, for Europe, some newspapers just flat out said, hey, sorry, we're not, in Europe or whatever, like things were just blocked. Like, hey, sorry, we're not complying with this yet. And they, just didn't make their website available to those countries. Google, there's some more things about fines and things like that, related to monopolistic behavior, etc. Some of those things, I think they just linger in the courts for a long time, and they probably end up getting settled. But in some cases, I think it was with Portugal in the last month or so, or with some of that article, they were basically threatening to just turn off news, just okay, we'll just ignore you. So it's really not tenable to say we're going to be sign on the dotted line and be sure no one uploads any kind of copyrighted content on our platform at all. And even any objectionable content, right? With Facebook Live as a case study, they're really, really struggling. And what happened, recently with a terrorist event where the terrorist, was broadcasting stuff, and they just struggled so much. Not only with, the live thing they were able to deal with, but it's all the copies and just we're talking thousands and thousands, I think, even per second. The way that these things have been automated. So AI is not going to save the day any more than 5G is going to save the day for rural digital divide bandwidth connectivity issues. And so I think that what we're risking is a further fracturing of the internet. One of the fundamental ideas of the internet has been basically that you have the intelligence at the ends, and then you have dumb wires in the middle. And so these packets are just transmitted. And while that ideal in today's day of huge, terabytes and petabytes and whatever of data, I definitely get, as a technology director and someone who worked for a telecom actually for a couple years, the need for quality of service and some network management and things like that. I think that this is going to be bad for the global internet. And I think that we're going to, see some non-compliance on the part of some of the tech companies, basically by saying, okay, fine, Europe, I'm just going to turn my website off in your country. But I don't know. Do you think that's a viable outcome, or how do you see it?
Well, you mentioned the GDPR earlier in your comments, and I have a little bit of insight on this because I had a few friends that were overseas when those regulations were put into place, and they were trying to get back to U.S.-based websites while they were traveling, and one of two things happened. In one case, actually in a couple of cases, they were sent to a very minimalistic version of website that had no advertising on it and just simple content. And I had a friend that said, woohoo, because it basically turned off all the tracking. The website was a lot faster. It was just the news as opposed to the news plus advertising. But the majority experience from folks I know that were outside of the continental United States was that the websites basically ceased to function, and in most cases were blocked completely because they couldn't meet those regulations, and there was potential fines for U.S.-based companies that based in the European directives that made it difficult for people to move around that without totally reinventing their websites. So let's not kid about this, that it might be a European regulation, but really the impact could be worldwide. And you mentioned earlier a fractured internet, Wes. I think that's a very interesting way to look at that, because that could very well be it. There's the European internet, and then there's everyone else's internet. The same is also true about U.S. decisions related to net neutrality. There could be a U.S.-based internet and the rest of the world. There's already two internets in terms of the Great Firewall of China, because there happens to be a lot of websites that are generally accessible outside of China, but not always. And there's a large number of websites that can't make it through the firewall into China itself. And the promise of the internet has always been, for the 40 years of its existence, is that everyone is treated the same on the internet, and everyone has a shot on the internet to get its data to be transformed worldwide. And I agree. I think it's a very scary thing. I think it's scary for creators that rely on these ubiquitous and free platforms to broadcast their wares, whether it's audio based information or video based information, or theoretically that also applies now to the written internet, the gazillions of words that are published each day on the less formal platforms, where people can publish their views and thoughts. And yeah, I do think it's a dangerous direction. and it doesn't really help anyone here.
And, like, let's think of blog comments, right? So I've hosted a blog since 2003. It's been a WordPress-based blog since 2005. I have comments turned on. I post critiques of things, and under these, what is it? Something 13, right? Law 13 or whatever. What's the name of it? It's anyway, under these guidelines, you're not. Some of the fear around this was that like all internet memes will be dead. You won't be able to take a small, copy, which that is not going to happen on the internet of the West. Let's say, of the United States. I don't think that they're going to chill, every single website. But will it have a chilling effect on people who want to create a platform, for instance? Are you going to have the capacity to either use algorithmic methods or human moderation in order to comply for this? Like, is that, are the Amazons, Googles, Microsofts, Apples of the world the only companies that are going to be big enough with the budgets large enough to try to comply with it? Or will anyone be able to comply? And I kind of think we're at the point where no one will be able to fully comply. Right. And those that attempt to are going to do it by significantly chilling the speech and basically having, some kind of moderation queue and approval process. I don't know, but hopefully it's something that they can step back from. I know we're not a political show and we're not going to go into depth about Brexit, but isn't it interesting what's happening and continuing to unfold in Great Britain in terms of folks wanting to step back from the vote that was taken, and maybe this will be something that Europe will want to take a step back from. I think the ones to watch it's Google, right? How is Google going to respond to this, and are they going to try and comply? Or are they going to say something like, I think they were saying it was Portugal over Google News, because there's all this anger and angst, right, over journalism. And there's a thought, I think, on the part of some legislators, which resonates with some folks, and probably not just in Europe, that, gosh, we need to save journalism and we need to support creatives and we need to extort money from these greedy, Silicon Valley-based tech companies who are making so much money on the backs of journalists that are putting out their content and really not getting paid adequately for it. And certainly the demise of paid journalism, is a reality in our disruptive technological age. However, I don't think regulation in this, kind of vein and context and flavor, whatever, is the answer to that. So it is definitely going to be something important to watch. And there's lots of great issues to talk about with students, right? From copyright to fair use, to do you think you should be able to, fair use rules in the United States, should they be global? We've had debates over the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Are human rights universal or are they contextual, right? If I'm in Saudi Arabia, do I truly, and I'm a woman, should I have the rights, equivalent to a man? I think that you should, irrespective of your gender identification. I think you should have equal rights no matter where you happen to be. So it's interesting how fair use and the ability for people to post content and express themselves, basically this is going to lead to not just a global debate about that, but actions on the part of the large tech companies, especially, to see how they're going to respond. And the interesting thing is they could respond by simply, turning off their website accessibility. And that'll be something interesting to see if even WordPress and other kinds of platforms offer that as an option, right? If you publish today on Amazon as an independent author, which I have done and need to do more of in the months to come, you can choose to make your book available in different countries. And then there's different, payment, you can set different prices and whatnot. And Apple is the same way with iTunes. It's very interesting. Like when you're trying to say, okay, you can make things, I think, just equivalently say, this is going to be $10 US, make that whatever it is in Japanese yen or whatever. But it does make you a little more aware, kind of jars you to like, that's right, this is an international thing. And those companies that are helping, indie publishers are doing things to enable you to comply with those laws and in some cases, perhaps, taxes and things like that, in terms of things that are being put in there and they're taken care of. But it is a global internet. I definitely believe that the global nature of the internet is one of the most powerful things about it, right? We've not had, I think we've only had one person. No, Peggy responded to. And shout out to Peggy, who is not having daylight savings time in Arizona, and I think was expecting us an hour later. So yes, we're coming at you an hour earlier now that the rest of the country has moved into daylight savings time. And that made me completely lose my train of thought. So there you go. I'm done.
Well, the point being, I think that these are. Like I read an interesting article a couple of days ago. Actually, it was an article. It was a series of tweets back and forth regarding the frustration that some teachers feel about their colleagues that maybe aren't willing or able to become a little more tech savvy in the way they approach their classroom or act a bit helpless on the technology piece. I think stuff like this is going to be important to understand from the standpoint of knowing where technology is going, particularly in the medium to long-term future. And I do think that when we have ubiquitous platforms available that allow us to publish, that comes at a price that we've talked about here in the podcast. Or I think some other articles today that might go to that. But I do think this is an important thing. And it just seems like in the last 24 months or so, we have spent a lot of time kind of dismantling the internet that got us to this time period, right? Like the internet has been such a powerful force, sometimes for good, sometimes for not. But in any case, it's been extraordinary in the way it's evolved, and it's helped nudge our culture in this direction or another. And I think at some point, it could be a bridge too far when we keep adding pieces to break it apart. So,
indeed. All right. Well, hey, let's talk a little bit of Apple. We had a major Apple event this week, which was really a bizarro Apple event. But before saying a couple words about that, I put an article by Rolling Stone from March 16th in the show notes. It's called "Inside GarageBand: The Little App Ruling the Sound of Modern Music," and it really is a wonderful article talking about how many mainstream and very popular music artists have found the ease of use of GarageBand phenomenal for being able to get the ideas in their head, into, out of their head, basically, onto, the screen in terms of musical notes or beats and rhythms. And anyway, it's a delightful article. And I think we'll probably have some Apple bashing tonight. I mean, whatever Apple says, anything, there's going to be criticism. But there's warranted criticism. But I want to just begin the conversation about Apple with a huge shout out to how awesome that GarageBand continues to be an incredibly powerful program for unleashing musical creativity, completely free on the Mac platform, of course, if you buy the Mac. But also available on, the iOS platform for iPhones and iPads. And that's a lovely article. So I did watch part of the Apple event this past Monday. And what the heck? Basically 4 products that are not available now, 40 minutes of, lots of celebrities, talking about their shows. Also, I mean, to break them down, Apple News. I mean, I'm against walled gardens, right? And I do not use Apple News today on my phone for free, because when you share a link, it has to go into Apple News, and it doesn't allow people, as far as I know, who don't have Apple News to be able to see them. So I am not excited about Apple News. I do not think Apple's going to be the savior of the industry. I also really question with 300 magazines or whatever. I mean, how much money are those journalists going to actually make, when the subscription cost is being distributed among all of them? I do think the Apple Arcade is incredibly interesting, and we might talk more about Stadia, which is the new Google streaming platform that they announced 2 weeks ago, because gaming is massive and it's going to continue to be massive. I am interested in the fact that Apple TV, this is a big play. It's overall a big play for services, right? And so Apple, sees the declining sales of iPhones and understands that services are the future. And so they're moving in this direction. And I think the most compelling part of the whole deal, if you haven't seen it, is, well, 2 parts. It was really cool to see Steven Spielberg there live and, his introduction. And he's just incredible. I didn't watch the whole thing, by the way, but I did see after the fact the part that Oprah, talked about with 1 billion devices. And it's going to be really interesting to see creatives look at this sort of platform. But my overall thought is fractured, right? Today on Netflix, any of us who subscribe probably have access to a larger batch of media than we're ever going to have on Netflix, because Netflix was not mentioned at all in that Apple event and keynote, because this is a competitor in terms of Apple TV. This also makes it even more confusing to say the words Apple TV, because at school, I've had teachers when I've said, okay, I think we can put an Apple TV in your room, really confused when I don't show up with a large flat screen television, and hook something to their projector, because the TV is separate. Now, Apple TV, I was shocked to see, is going to be bundled not only in smart TVs, but also on the Amazon Fire Stick and on Roku devices. I don't know that you're going to be able to AirPlay, so wirelessly send content from an iOS device or a macOS device, to that Roku or that Fire Stick, but you're going to be able to stream content. And so you don't have to buy the $150 plus and more if it's going to be 4K, box in order to have Apple TV. So, overall, I guess I would say it's interesting, but what I've always found most interesting about Apple actually are the products, and this wasn't about products. And so, I'm not very excited by it. So what say you, Dr. Neifert?
Well, so it's interesting you ended up on that notion of that this wasn't about products, about services. And we've reported on this podcast a dozen times that in forecast calls related to stock prices and in leaks and in all sorts of news, there's been this notion that Apple wants to move toward services because, iPhone sales are slowing down. Their market share of laptops and desktop computers is decreasing, although their overall sales are increasing as desktop and laptop computers make a bit of a resurgence. But something interesting happened about a week and a half ago, which was, I guess it was 2.5 weeks ago now, that it was leaked from Apple that the event that Dr. Fryer is talking about, the services event, would be just the services only, because they didn't want to distract with hardware announcements. And as it turns out, last week, Apple made a series of hardware announcements. Nothing earth-shattering. There's a new iPad mini that starts at $399 that allows for Apple Pencil compatibility. So that's interesting, a relatively low price for that device. Apple updates iMacs for the first time in, I think, 2 years. The regular iMac, we're not talking the iMac Pro, but the regular aluminum cased iMac is now updated with, again, faster processors, and then also new graphics processing units, which would make these platforms faster. There's also AirPods 2 released. The reason why this is interesting to me is because, for me, I think I agree very much with Wes. The hardware was always a more interesting fascination to me than the software, and part of that's because that other than the operating system itself, so we're talking about OS 10 and, or I guess what they've called Mac OS now, and also iOS on the mobile devices, like that functionality was interesting to me, but the hardware itself is where I thought Apple was the most innovative. Software used to have kind of that it just works thing going for it, right? But the fact that they're taking hardware updates, which is really all Apple has left, right? Very rarely are they announcing a very innovative new hardware piece, because they just don't have much to offer anymore. They've really mastered most of these. You think glasses are next, Wes?
Yeah, Amy Webb, the futurist, says we're at peak iPhone because the future is going to be on our screen, on our lenses, and so yes, Apple is going to be a huge player in AR, VR, and eventually we're going to see, with batteries and miniaturization and 5G and the ability to be able to have the screen as large as your field of view can take it, because it's going to be on your glasses. But that is not a play that's going to happen in the next couple of years. It's a ways off.
Right. And, that in the meantime, with iPhone sales slowing down, I also tell you that from a personal family experience supporting a mostly iOS family, these phones are lasting for 2, 3, 4 years minimum, right? The battery is oftentimes an issue, but it's really easy to get a third party to replace the battery, and oftentimes those batteries are fairly high quality. Um, the other factor we haven't talked about as much on the podcast, but I also think impacts this. I think in the United States, at least, phone sales are slowing down because carrier subsidies don't exist anymore, right? 4 or 5 years ago, carriers started moving away from this notion that they would pay for the majority of an expensive device in exchange for you signing a 1 to 3 year contract in order for you to promise to pay a little more every month to help cover the cost of that device over 2 to 3 years. All the major carriers have abandoned that, although all of them will usually offer some kind of trade-in deal or way for you to update relatively easily. So there's just not this notion anymore that every 2 to 3 years you can get a relatively inexpensive new phone with all the latest on there, and people can rely on these devices for more than the 2 to 3 year time period. And yeah, we'll see. I did not watch any of the keynote. I did read a lot of various accounts of it, including some fairly critical accounts of Oprah showing up to the event and saying that, and part of it's because there's a lot of things that seem out of place about the television service and the direction they're going into. I am excited to see that the new Apple streaming service is compatible with other hardware architectures. So the Roku platform, Amazon Prime, or the Amazon devices that are Fire TV devices, it's compatible with that.
And that's a phenomenal compromise, right? That I think Tim Cook, what did Trump call him, like Tim Apple or something, or Apple Cook or something? Anyway, he brokered it directly with Bezos, with Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon. So like that's actually fantastic. I mean, as an Apple TV user and someone who I literally use my Apple TV every day, both in my office at work as well as the one I have at home. Hey, good. It's a cat interlude. And now a moment for our pets.
So yeah, I'm excited for that. I think it's a good call on their part. Although I'll tell you that if you want to read funny reviews, go to the Play Store on Android and look for the Apple Music app and the volume of hate that Android users pile upon that particular app, which is now owned by Apple, the former Beats Music service. It is an interesting phenomenon that I don't know if it will take off for the Android faithful. And I don't know, I don't understand the service enough yet to say whether it really differentiates itself from Netflix or Amazon Prime or Hulu or my other options.
Tim Apple, Peggy clarifies. Are you a Amazon Fire Stick owner? Have you played with that? I haven't actually ever used that. As I've used Chromecast and I have one, in one of our rooms, but not the Fire Stick. So what do you say to that? Is it a good platform?
It is a decent platform. I was actually an early adopter because I was offered an opportunity 6 months beforehand to, it had been announced, but to be an early tester. And I received a pretty cheap one to kind of test out with. I mean, the hardware is quite modest in that it's slow, although I am using one now that I think it's probably It's probably 4 years old this summer, and so it is the first generation of that hardware. But you don't need it to be that fast to stream media, right? So the interface has updated several times since I purchased the Fire Stick, and it looks more like the Apple TV interface now, which I think is to its credit.
No, go ahead.
And it's a perfectly sufficient platform for subscribing to something and streaming media.
On a school note, all right. So and I need to write this post. We've been using a service called ScreenCloud signage. I'll drop the link because I'm sure Peggy will want to immediately implement digital signage at her home using it. We've done a bunch of different things with signage. You can use different players. We're using Chromebits. But I think the more affordable way to go with that is now to use the Amazon Fire Stick. And of course, Google's matured in their free signage options that you can, use without a subscription. So that screen cloud is something that you pay for, and then you have to have the device. But anyway, at some point we can segue perhaps into talking about Stadia and streaming gaming, because that's also related to all this, right? I mean, it's weird. We've acquired an Xbox One in the last, few months at our house, not playing it really all that much. But anyway, the future of gaming, where all that goes. Do you need a multi-$100 game system console, or will a $30 Chromecast and a controller, with this high-speed internet meet your needs?
Yep, absolutely. And then I guess I would also note a couple of other articles. The Verge was pretty critical of the AirPod release. If for no other reason, they were talking about wireless charging, other phenomenon there that they feel are misfires. And then this is a more recent article. This is actually one of the reasons why that a Mac laptop would not be, a new Mac laptop would be on my purchase list right now. Apple is apologizing for, once again, keyboards on their high-end Mac laptops are notoriously failing in a variety of different ways, and in some cases keys stop working, and they're good about replacing the hardware when it malfunctions, but the bottom line is that it's still problematic, right? Like, for the price you're paying for these laptops, they just don't seem premium if they break at this rate.
And as a tech director, I can speak to that, because we've got about 95% of our faculty on Mac laptops. And so we've opted to stay with the last generation 2017 MacBook Air, which has the, USB-A connectors, because, hey, a lot of people still have old school flash drives. Remember these? Smart boards, etc. And I have definitely been upset seeing some keyboards fail and some different issues like that, because you basically have to replace a large component, which costs hundreds and hundreds of dollars. In fact, earlier this year, right after we don't buy the extended warranty. And so right after that warranty expired, we had, I think, 2 different machines. It's not enough that we buy the extended warranties, and Apple still has a great return on investment, but it is frustrating that all of the new hardware does not allow for us to crack it open without violating the, warranty. And, we can't update RAM. We can't put in a new larger solid state drive. And so anyway, this is basically the Steve Jobification of Apple hardware, and Wozniak's vision continuing to lose out, where you have to basically replace the whole device, and you can't crack it open and DIY it in many ways. So that said, we are not abandoning the Mac platform. And I do think it has fantastic return on investment, but there's a lot to weigh and consider, especially when you look at Chrome and other kinds of options in the security environment, yada, 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 that we have to contend with.
Yep, absolutely. So let's jump maybe to a public service announcement, a reminder from TechCrunch on March 20th, 2019. Windows 7 is nearing its end. The long-running popular operating system that was in many ways the heir apparent to Windows XP, which was end-of-life a few years back. Microsoft making a much more aggressive push towards having people update to more modern operating systems. You probably have popped up notice if you're on Windows 7 still, that January 14th, 2020 is when Microsoft will stop rolling out security fixes for flaws and vulnerabilities in the operating system. And a very important piece here, because of my observation working with schools, both in context of my day job and also as a professional development guy, that a lot of well-run districts like to find a version of an operating system and stick with it as long as they possibly can, even if newer versions of the operating system are available or arguably better, because it's easier to manage the single operating system. And I know a lot of districts that are locked on Windows 7. They have not made the update to Windows Windows 10, which has been available since fall 2015. And in a few short months, Windows 7 will no longer be considered an updated or secure operating system.
And that is absolutely huge, right? We saw in the last 6 to 8 months, I don't remember when it was exactly, a major flaw for Windows XP, and Microsoft actually released a patch for an operating system. They said, we're not going to, support it all, release it all. We made the jump this last summer for every single one of our Windows platforms at school to go ahead and move them to Windows 10. Now, with the October 2018 snafus, if we can use an incredibly tactful and friendly term for what was a freaking nightmare and caused me, 50 plus hours probably of work, because of display bricking that happened on our all-in-one Dells that had not had a firmware update, and, we're not friendly with the Microsoft hardware. It's been a good transition overall. Okay. I think probably other schools that are running that kind of hardware that's like 4 to 5 years old, they still are on Windows 7. Dell had not apparently heard of people having the same kind of an issue, which we had on 2 different labs, right? So we're talking 40 different machines, but it's a big deal. Security patches and updates are so important, and we need to pay attention to this. We are probably not the only school out there that has been running some older versions of Office. On the Mac platform particularly, they've become much more persistent and nagging to say, hey, this software is not updated and it's not supported and you need to buy a new version. And I know it's painful to think about, subscribing at $39 a head for the first tier. You get the client-based software of Microsoft Office 365. But anyway, that is just part of the journey that we're on. And so anyway, this is something, if you are involved in technology at all, or you're an administrator, we need to be aware of. You do not want to be running software that is not receiving any kind of security patches at all. I think there's an argument to be made that you're not, I don't know, there's a due diligence issue here. And hey, maybe you need to run Neverware and run Chrome, or, you need to do something else, but don't run an operating system that's no longer receiving patches. End of rant.
Yep. Absolutely true. And, the other piece of it is, well, one thing I will say, if you are someone that's on Windows 7, managing either a lot of systems, or you yourself are just on Windows 7 as a private user, Windows 10 is a pretty solid operating system. I would say that, I wouldn't say it tempted me back from Macworld, because the bottom line is that I do use a Windows platform part-time at work. I also do a Mac one, but I'm now on Chrome OS almost full-time, especially when I am utilizing a laptop. But the bottom line is that Windows 10 is pretty good, and it is a better operating system in my opinion than Windows 7. I think it's evolving in a good and positive way, and it feels very modern and crisp. And I can tell you that even older hardware runs it pretty well. I have a couple of 8-year-old desktops at work we use for projects that are running Windows 10, and with 8 gigs of RAM and a solid state drive, it feels crisp and modern and very usable even for a power user. So if you are worried about this date, if for no other reason than you I just don't know the operating system, I can assure you that Windows 10 is a worthy upgrade from Windows 7. I would, however, wipe your machine and start from scratch. The update process adds a lot of gunk that's not super great.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a great advice for anybody. Which, by the way, I mean, we're having such an uptick of phishing this month, of phishing attacks. I just had to send out an email to all our faculty, staff, and it's one of my geeks of the week, as I posted the advice on my blog. I mean, we need to help people be able to wipe their devices, whether it's your smartphone, it's your laptop. I mean, this is the way to remain secure today, is periodically blow away your entire system, install it fresh, and then, add your files and the other programs that you need. I would love to talk about Huawei, China, and 5G briefly. Again, we haven't been online for a little while, and so these are a couple weeks old, but I don't normally do this, but there's a French post, and I think I probably retweeted or Twitter recommended or whatever. This person, Le Monde, who is he's a historian, senior advisor for Asia, non-resident senior associate for Carnegie Endowment. Anyway, he has his take on Europe's reappearing fractures in front of China, Huawei, 5G as a test. I think these are headlines that most Americans are asleep to, right? The CFO of Huawei, which is the largest handset manufacturer and in the world, I think, and is a Chinese-based company that a military person, founded, and we've got all kinds of suspicion, not only in the United States but also in other Western democracies for their hardware. Has been under arrest in Canada, and has been facing extradition to the United States because of a breach of, I think UN sanctions against sending stuff to Iran. We talk about a fractured internet and what's happening today. Right now, there's all kinds of hubbub over the implementation of 5G networks, which, by the way, are not going to happen tomorrow. It looks like it's going to take, what I heard on Twitter last week, I think 4 to 5 years to get 30% of the United States on 5G. I mean, this is not going to revolutionize everyone's connectivity in the next year. But anyway, his article, and it's translated from French, is pretty interesting, talking about really how Europe is being courted by China and how Europe may or may not go with the United States and, quote, the West. I mean, Western Europe is part of the West, but go with the United States, Australia, other countries. Go ahead and install Huawei Chinese-based hardware in 5G infrastructure. And if I'm reading this right, I mean, a lot of the fear of this is that China will be able to flip a switch and get all that data and be able to extend their surveillance state, out into the 5G airwaves of whatever country has implemented their technology. The way in which China is strategically positioning itself to be dominant in the world economically, and in terms of trade, and also in terms of geopolitics, I think is highly underestimated. And I've put a link here to a wonderful interview on triangulation, which is one of the Twit Network's podcasts. And I have not actually listened to, I don't know, this might have been the first one, but it's basically an hour-long interview with one author. And so Amy Webb is now my favorite futurist, and she has a new book called The Big Nine, and it's looking at Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Huawei, these different companies that are kind of defining the future and defining the present today. And so the overall takeaway here is, number one, listen to Triangulation 387, and that's the interview with Amy Webb. It's a fantastic podcast interview from March 1st that will really stretch your mind. And second of all, I think we ought to be paying attention to what's happening with Huawei and China. I don't know that we're going to, as individuals, do anything advocacy-wise, but in terms of being awake to the realities of international geopolitics and the ways that we in the West need to look at the long game that China is playing, as I'm trying to do this, looking at your cat's tail. For those of you listening to the show, you're missing, you're missing a visual extravaganza. No, it's fine. Anyway, we've talked before on the show about Tristan Harris and Noah Harari's interview with Wired Magazine, Harari's book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, the idea that Western liberal democracy is not equipped to deal with the kind of surveillance capitalism that's available today, and specifically when you look at China and the long game that they're playing, economically. So I don't know, Jason, is this something anybody should be concerned about? I mean, we're in the United States. Why should we worry about China? Huawei, who are they? I can't even buy their handsets here. Should I be concerned at all about any of that?
Well, it's a manifestation of how things aren't the way they used to be, right? Like that's the globalization has obviously been an incredibly important part of the discussion of world economics for the past 20 years. And, again, not a political podcast, but part of what has happened in the last 4 years has been a, frank discussion about the impacts of a worldwide economy on a former completely dominant economy like the United States. And I think that, the thing to remember is that politics and economics, and particularly trade, are intermixed quite substantially. And I don't really, I don't have a thought here. I feel like that I'm still watching the story unfold of whether Huawei is a true risk or not, or if it's, just profit gathering, or it's actually a chance at greater control of the outside world for China, to a Chinese company to go and build the 5G networks of substantial areas. Wes, I don't know if you saw that Huawei has made an agreement with Italy to substantially build out, I believe, their 5G networks and provide infrastructure there, which is, amongst a number of other issues, ticked off the EU. So I think there's definitely things to keep an eye on there. And does it impact the end user? Not directly, of course it doesn't, right? Because there's actually a lot of political things that impact the networks and equipment, and whether things are fast or super fast or slow. In the United States, there's a lot of politics around rural access to internet, high-speed internet, and the lack of funding for very rural areas to get access to high speed, modern internet speeds. But in the end, it always does ultimately impact you as an end user. So I would say this particular issue, we should continue to monitor closely in hopes that we can get to the truth and find out what really is happening in regards to these technological news bits.
And I think we need to pay attention to China and I mean, as we struggle in our more open society, and hopefully liberal democracy, Republican, not political party, but thinking of a representative democracy, we struggle with these issues of fake news and control and free speech and all these kinds of things. The long game that China is playing is something that we seem ill-equipped to be able to do because we have such a short-term focus, and we're so, focused on things that are happening in the next, year or 4 years. We're not thinking about the next 40 years and 50 years. And so with the president for life that they have in China, anyway, listen to Amy Webb. And if you do, hey, give me a shout out. Let me know. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, because I really do think those are powerful ideas that really stretch our minds. I don't have a link here in the show notes. Maybe I'll do it next week. But Amy gives a great South by Southwest presentation about future trends, a little bit like the Horizon Report, if you're familiar with that. And I don't know if that's continuing, but the Horizon Report, Horizon K-12, all those things, those were fantastic to be able to look at emerging trends and what kinds of things might, be affecting us in the next 6 months and the next, 2 years, etc. The event horizon of technology. So anyway, let me know if you end up listening to that.
Well, let's do. So we have time. Probably one more big one. There's an article that was, I think it's 2 weeks old now, that actually caused a little bit of interesting discussion on Twitter when I posted it. This is an Atlantic article from March 14th, 2019, noting a trend that's not surprising to me at all, having been in classrooms with Google Docs implemented. But the hot new chat app for teens, according to the Atlantic, is Google Docs. And the chat feature on Google Docs has replaced a lot of other platforms for having kids talk to one another. And if you are a tech-savvy parent of a teen, if you are a teacher that's paying attention to one-to-one Chromebook environments, this is not something new. And in fact, has been a factor ever since these tools were rolled out in the classroom environment. In fact, my first opportunity to see people abuse maybe the platform in this way was actually at a professional development event with teachers. I was assisting someone in teaching an initial Google Docs training, and 2 people in the crowd were complaining about the presenter in the chat not realizing that other people could see it, and then a whole embarrassing thing ensued, and it was not super great. But like that's a reality of the platform, and I think this is an important article, not because, oh, woe is me, we should ban Google Docs, but we just need to be really aware when we adopt such powerful tool sets that are built around collaboration, that students are likely to collaborate whether they're collaborating on the topic at hand or not. Now, I received a couple back channels about this article. I think some people have read this that it's a negative, or that I'm posting a negative thing about Google Docs. Let me be super clear that I would lay in traffic for the Google Suite, right? Like it's been such an incredible part of my workflow and my professional and personal life. But I also think that we cannot throw or put our heads in the sand as technology integrators and advocates that there are times when these tools can be used for nefarious purposes. And I had someone note to me on Twitter that this proves that students really want to be in connection with one another, and they absolutely thrive in an environment where they can collaborate, yada yada yada. I think that's generally true, but that's not what this article is saying at all. And in fact, I don't think just giving students these tools to work on with a content focus is necessarily going to bring the positive results you're looking for, because kids, it's age appropriate for kids to screw around. It's age appropriate for kids to be distracted by relationships with their peers that are not content related. And it's interesting that this particular article mentions note passing, because when Dr. Fryer and I were kids back in the 1930s, this is all we had to work with, right? There was no chat app available to us when we went to high school. We had literal note passing, right? That was part of this process. I think we both probably craved collaboration then too, but I don't think that's because teachers weren't utilizing the power of note passing in the classroom. So, Wes, as a tech director, what's your perception of this issue?
It's interesting. I just saw that for Google Vault, Google G Suite admins need to make a decision about archival duration, retention policy for Hangouts and the new Hangouts and the ways in which that is morphing. I think it's really important to let parents know. Unfortunately, this last year I was not able to attend as many of our beginning year parent orientation sessions, but I think it's really incumbent and important upon schools that are providing kids with access to the G Suite and to other kinds of tools to help parents realize, what are you doing? What are our kids going to be able to do? We don't turn email on until 5th grade for students. But, the tools within Google Docs that allow for chatting and these kind of things, hey, guess what? Kids can bully in any kind of interactive forum. So it's important to let parents know about it. You need to decide as a school what you are going to turn on, you're going to turn off. And then you also need to empower users, as well as, thinking of students, and then also parents, to know what the options are, right? And so for some of those kind of things like Hangouts chat, you can choose to turn that off and not, be interrupted with those kinds of pop-ups. And it's an ongoing opportunity for digital citizenship conversations that we need to be having, because, hey, guess what? The interactive web is here. We called it Web 2.0 in the mid 90s, and it was like this big thing. Now it's ubiquitous and pretty much mainstream, but that doesn't mean it's not fraught with challenges and needing to have things that we talk with parents about. Let's do a couple of quick hits before we do Geeks of the Week as we approach the top of the hour. My first one is going to be Verge article, March 27th. FTC hands multi-million-dollar fines to 4 robocalling companies. I'm glad to see the FTC doing something that might possibly help consumers, because I am absolutely not a fan of basically any appointed, person in the executive branch right now in the government, I don't think. But this is a good thing. I do not think it's going to completely stem the flow. I don't know about you, but I just about can't answer any call that's not, someone in my contacts on my phone today, because it is freaking ridiculous. So I'm glad to see the FTC doing that. What's your quick hit?
Firefox released Firefox Lockbox this week, which is an application that allows you to use safe passwords in Firefox on your mobile device, both Android and iOS. And I will say that although Firefox is missing 1 or 2 critical pieces of functionality that would prevent me from using it full time, not to mention I use a Chromebook most of the time. I like that Firefox keeps releasing more and more applications with their privacy-minded shtick that allow you to do the advanced things that I think are really great on a mobile phone. I'm a LastPass user personally. I love LastPass to store passwords. I have installed on my Android phone. It allows me to use my fingerprint, because I have a fingerprint scanner on my phone to authenticate that. So it's quick and easy for me to get access to my super secure 20-character randomly generated passwords. But I think that's all a kind of a good phenomenon for us to shoot for. So cheers to the folks at Firefox for releasing more useful apps that can help up people's security game.
Absolutely. Let's see. Another quick hit. Google. You put, I think, the article from The Verge. Stadia is about the future of YouTube, not gaming. I dropped in a video link from The Verge, which is fantastic, called Google Stadia wants to be the Netflix of gaming. Like, we all need to be paying attention to gaming and education, right? Gamification is huge. And there's a negative side to this as far as addiction and screen addiction and how long we're, engaged with different kinds of games. But I've mentioned this earlier in this podcast, like Google's vision here is that they've got the cloud computing capacity to pull this off, to basically have a Chromecast device and then a Wi-Fi controller. And instead of having a $300 console, Xbox, Switch, whatever, PlayStation, you're going to just be able to play off the cloud, and the latency or delay is going to be so short and negligible in your internet connection that you're not going to need to have that massive processor sitting in your living room or your bedroom or whatever. You're just going to be able to play off the cloud. And so it is phenomenal. If you're not aware of how many teens watch other people playing games, and wait a minute, let's not say teens, let's just say human beings. It's gigantic. We were talking today at lunch about, some people that folks know who are just basically going pro with gaming. Like there's this person that was being discussed who is so good at Fortnite, like people pay to just watch this guy play Fortnite, and he's unbelievable in his skills. And so somebody mentioned, I think at the University of Oklahoma, now there is like an esports degree, and they're like looking at this as, something that can be studied, and it's a big thing, right? Like sports are a big thing. And so watching people play esports and then participating yourself in that, but the spectator part of it is obviously much bigger than the actual you're playing and getting paid. Important to look at. Got another quick hit?
I do. One last one, and I've missed it. Oh, Google has announced that it will be making cuts to its hardware division, including its laptop and tablet development. And that's highly disappointing to me. I'm a Pixelbook owner, very happy Pixelbook owner. It's the nicest laptop I've owned. I've now owned a variety of Google devices that are really outstanding devices to kind of provide a reference device for other manufacturers to shoot for. There is a lot of interesting conversation going on various Chrome OS blogs and news sources about what that means, whether it means that Google will have future devices or not. Most people assume that they will release some new Pixelbook 2 this year, which will be 2 years after the initial release in 2017. But I hope Google continues for a long, long time to release hardware, because I think they're good at it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, there are more articles that we will not have time to talk about. I will do my quick geeks of the week here. I mentioned ScreenCloud. I'll put that link in the show notes. I have a link that I just wrote tonight. I titled it Advice for Responding to and Protecting Against Phishing Email Attacks. I'll just say that I filed my first police report with our local police station this week because of an attempted fraud issue relating to phishing. So targeted attacks are different than just a general, hey, I'm in Nigeria, send me money or whatever. But really important stuff, right? My mantra right now is continuing to be safe, be connected, and tell stories. And the first one is be safe. So who is going to be the catalyst to be safe for your family, for your friends? Like, this is really personal, right? None of us want to be the victims of identity theft. So Phishing attacks are on the rise. There's some hopefully good advice there. This is the first show where I am enjoying our Google Wi-Fi, thanks in part to Jason and his endorsement. I've also recognized that you've got to decide who you're going to invest with and play with, right? Are you going to be an Amazon family? Are you going to be a Google family? I mean, Jason's kind of doing both, and he's got Apple and all this stuff going on, but we're very invested in the Google ecosystem. Let me say it's phenomenal, right? On my Apple, what is it? Air,
Pod?
No, it's not an AirPod. What's it called? The base station.
Airport
Extreme. Yes, it's the Airport Extreme that has all the storage and everything, which we don't even use. I mean, I could get a maximum of like 30 to 40 megs down in my house. I'm getting, in some cases 200. I've got a 300 meg down, internet connection. It's amazing. It's incredible. I can get basically 100 megs anywhere in our house, and I bought 3 different mesh routers. So thank you, Jason, for endorsing that. The fact that Amazon actually bought Eero, even though they've announced they're not going to share data and remain private, whatever. I have big issues with Amazon in terms of privacy, and Facebook in terms of trusting them. So yay, Google. Glad to have the Wi-Fi. I put a video in this. If you're going to watch any video in our show notes, watch this. It's called The Storytellers Behind Apple TV Plus. This was shared during the Apple keynote. It's freaking amazing, okay? Ron Howard, Steven Spielberg, all these just incredible directors talking about story and what makes story powerful, and how a flow experience, when we forget ourselves, when we lose ourselves in the story and the magic of cinema, it's amazing, right? So watch this, share this with your kids, especially if you're going to encourage people to tell stories, which is a great thing to encourage people of all ages to do. And the very last thing is floorplanner.com, our middle school makerspace guru. Eric Sappington shared this with me, and he is helping one of the classes of 8th graders actually design the possible layout of one of our labs that we're going to take cubicles out of and hopefully put flexible furniture in. And so they've taken measurements and created this. And now kids are dropping furniture into it. And there's ways in which you can even put a map, or if you have like a blueprint or whatever of your building or whatever. He showed me how you can then make that hyperlinked, and it's going to be to scale. It's freaking amazing, and it's free. It's not AutoCAD, but Google SketchUp has a fairly steep learning curve. This has a lesser learning curve, and it is completely free. Floorplanner.com. End of Wes's Geeks of the Week.
Excellent. And I have a kind of quick one. Recode reported an interesting statistic on Monday that last year, American consumers spent more at Airbnb places than they did at Hilton places, which is a sign, ladies and gentlemen, that the shared economy, at least at this time, is facing even more popular growth. And I am a happy Airbnb customer. In fact, I recently had a trip to California where my wife and I stayed in Palo Alto, California for 2 nights at an Airbnb, and we didn't have a super great experience on our last day there. And we had a wonderful experience talking to the owner. He refunded us part of our money, and it's something we know would have never happened if we'd stayed, frankly, at a Hilton or other style property. And so I want to give one quick hint. My wife and I do a lot of travel. In fact, we just booked a trip to Albuquerque and Santa Fe, New Mexico. We'd never been, so we want to go and hang out there. We're going to go at the end of May, and very excited about that. But we found an Airbnb place there that was relatively inexpensive and a great location. But we use what's called their superhost. You can go in and mark off superhosts as your preferred provider. There are a lot of Airbnbs in every town, but the superhosts have been vetted additionally from Airbnb and have a history of being good, successful Airbnb hosts. And so if you're leery to try the model, you've heard some of the horror stories, and I've heard a couple of them too. When my wife and I use the service, it's because we, only go to Superhost, people that have had extra vetting and have had a great experience with their guests.
So my wife loves New Mexico. I do too. We've done a lot of camping there. We love Santa Fe. There's a great restaurant that you can go to. I'm trying to think, Sandia. So it's Sandia Peaks. It's the mountain that you'll see kind of up to the northeast. You can ride the tram up to the top and have a lovely romantic dinner. And it is beautiful. And look out. And, the slogan of New Mexico is the land of enchantment, and it truly is. So I hope you have a wonderful time. And we might have, there's also in the old town, I don't know, we could probably send you some different restaurant recommendations, but it's great, great Tex-Mex food, and really just a lovely climate and a wonderful place to go. So I hope you have a great trip, and I'm excited that you guys are going to experience the land of enchantment.
Outstanding. Well, Wes, where can the masses find you on the internet?
I am W. Fryer on Twitter, and I am becoming more unleashed in my blogging because I have not really done a lot of that, relatively speaking, in the last 4 years. And that is on speedofcreativity.org.
And I am Tech Savvy Teach on Twitter, where I post pretty regularly there. I don't like to, well, not that I don't like to. I prefer, if discussions are going to get contentious or deep in something, to pull it to another medium to do so, but I love to connect with people there and share resources and chat back and forth. I am also the Northwest Council for Computer Education Tech Savvy Administrator in Residence, and I blog at the NCC Tech Savvy Teacher blog.ncc.org. And in fact, I'm releasing a Tech Savvy tip tomorrow, so check out the blog and see what I'll be sharing with you this week. But this whole deal, it's not a blog, it is a podcast. This is the EdTech Situation Room. This was episode number 128. And we are excited, as always, to come to you via either live means. You can come to EdTech SR, where we post that link every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Central Time. I think it's 400 UTC, 300, 200.
It's early.
Changed.
It's early.
Yeah, it's the middle of the night in Europe, so better off probably not checking this out then. You can come join our chat room and interact with us live, and do that if you prefer, or you can download us wherever finer podcasts are aggregated. You can go to our website and download a little tiny version, MP3 version of it, or you can always see YouTube. Until then, until next time, when we come back at you live, we hope you have a great day and you stay safe and stay savvy.
Adios.